Like I said with part 1 that I listed earlier, this part includes some stuff like some subject matters that are being discussed in this chapter, which is 11. And like I said in part 1, there are certain subject matters that viewers may find this disturbing but also upsetting. If you do not wish to continue the rest of this chapter, if you're sensitive to stuff like this, just like with part 1, you may click off this video if you find anything in this video upsetting to watch. Now, with that said, let's continue on with this chapter. You sense her anywhere? Kim asked, as Ron then stood in his meditative stance with his eyes shut. I'm trying, Ron replied. These train yards are so huge. It's not easy for me to... He suddenly paused when another aurora came floating through his senses. It was a very weak aurora, and it was filled with despair, agony, and helplessness. There were also 2 other auroras in this area. One, of course, was filled with dark intentions. Ron had tried to pinpoint the location of these auroras, but it wasn't easy. His mind had been clouded with fear again, and this forced Ron to clear his mind once more and try again. Ron, what is it? What's going on? Kim asked worriedly. Upon detecting the right location of the weak aurora, Ron's eyes shot open as he broke the connection. Kim, I think I just found Bonnie, he replied in a fearful tone. I sense a weak aurora somewhere in the past of the other sheds to the west, and this one was different than the other ones I think it's her. Is she all right? Kim asked. I don't know, Ron replied, already moving. It was a very weak aurora, so I am afraid those monsters might have done something to her. We need to find her and get her out of there. Bonnie may be under guard by more of those thugs, so we'll need to be more careful, Kim advised. She is, Ron replied, as he opened the exit door of the shed. I sensed 2 other auroras in the area, and they were evil ones. So I have no doubt that Bonnie's being watched by guards in the area, so we'll need to take them out without alerting them. You better lead the way on this one then, Kim ushered. I don't know where this place is. I can lead us there, Ron replied, but we'll have to be careful. Just then, Ron and Kim heard multiple machine guns shouting outside, followed by shouting in the distance. It sounded like Lloyd and Nelson mixed with other yells they assumed they were guards. Looks like the Global Justice agents have got caught by the guards, Ron said grimly, then began to move faster. We better moving too in case they do something to Bonnie. Kim quickly followed Ron as her between the other sheds in the small abandoned shacks. All the while, more gunshots kept firing. After crossing a few sets of abandoned tracks to the west of the rusty old freight cars, a switch engine had been parked them. A large train then came into view. This is it, KP, Ron said, pointing at the shed. I think Bonnie's in there. We better check for guards before barging in through. Ron, to your left, Kim suddenly yelled, jumping to the side. Ron quickly turned to his left to see a black shadow guard pulling a gun from his belt, raising it towards him. But before he could even get a shot off, Ron had leapt at the masked thug with lightning speed as his mystical monkey powers and kicked him right in the chest. The thug went flying backwards and slammed into a train car so hard that it dented the metal of the shattered every bone in his body, including his spine. He slumped on the ground lifeless. Upon realizing that Ron actually killed him, he felt his heart skip a beat, and even felt the red rage tug at him. Ron, are you all right? Kim asked, noticing Ron's blank expression. Give in! Give in! The demonic voice echoed in Ron's mind. No! Leave me alone! Ron hissed, shaking his head. Kim then jumped back and shot, thinking Ron was addressing to her. Ron! What the hell is wrong with you? Kim demanded. No, it's not you, Ron said, grabbing his chest. It was the red rage. It spoke again. Don't let it get to you, Ron, Kim urged him. Remember what I told you about holding back at the base? I know, Ron replied. If I force its influence back into my mind, I don't think its presence any longer. I think killing that guard somehow triggered it. But I've got my emotions under control again. Let's get Bonnie and get out of here. All right, Kim nodded. Just calm your mind, whatever you feel is slipping through, and you should be fine. Kim and Ron quickly headed towards the enormous train shed, saw a small rotted door next to the train shed doors, which was practically ripped off from the rotting frame. All right, let's be quiet as we enter. We don't want any of the guards to spot us, or they might try to kill Bonnie, Ron advised as he and Kim led inside the shed. Ron looked around the place as Kim was followed behind him. There were a few rusty Indian war-bonnet Santa Fe engines parked on the side of the tracks to where the two silver B units behind them, which had a faded red letter on the sides. On them was an old steam engine that looked like it had been rotted in there for decades. Behind the steam engine were a rusty old tender with a dented train car, and behind it were two more tank cars that looked like about a year old. These ones with large wires wrapped around them, which led to the top hatches. And far ahead, Ron saw someone tied to a metal beam, which all the way up to the high ceiling. There were two black shadow guards standing next to the person, tied to the pole with their backs turned to Kim and Ron, clearly not having to notice them. But upon a little closer, Ron just realized that this person was Bonnie, and even from a distance, he could tell that she was in bad shape. As he and Kim were about to step out from behind the engine they stood, they heard one of the guards speak. "I hear gunshots out there. Think Team Possible arrived?" they asked. "Might be," the other guard replied. "We better alert the boss." Upon hearing that, Kim made a cut on her throat gesture at Ron, who knew what he might have to do. Ron then drove out his revolver and quickly stepped out from behind the engine, fired two shots at the guard on the left. It hit him at the back of the neck, which caused him to fall forward, catching the other guard's attention. "What the hell? Who just—" The guard was then cut off as Kim jumped out and opened fire on him. Several bullets hit him in the chest and killed him, killing him on the spot. But as soon as the guards were dead, Kim and Ron rushed towards Bonnie. The closer they got, the more horrible she looked. Kim noticed something. Once Kim and Ron had finally reached Bonnie, they noticed that she had no clothes on. But of course, one of her forelegs were missing. It was clear seeing bruises, cuts, and scrapes that Bonnie had been tortured, beaten, and possibly violated as well. "Oh my God, Bonnie!" Kim exclaimed in horror. "Her four legs had been hacked off," Ron said as he smashed through the iron chain restraints, removed Bonnie from the pole. "And she's lost a lot of blood, but she's still breathing. She needs a doctor right now," Kim replied in a serious tone. As Ron lifted Bonnie to his arms, he suddenly heard what sounded like electric beeping and clicking coming from the freight cars with wires on it. Another freight car on the tracks. The opposite to the first one they heard, they began hearing beeping and clicking. "Ron, what's that noise?" Kim asked nervously. "I don't know. Sounds like it's coming from the wired freight cars," Ron replied, glancing over to the freight cars with the wires cables turning to it. "Wait a second. That beeping sounds like—" Kim paused as a horrifying thought suddenly came to her. Kim rushed up to one of the tank cars, checked the spot where the strange sounds were coming from, and felt her heart skip a beat in horror upon realizing it actually was. Kim spun around and ran. "These tanks! They're rigged with time bombs!" Ron then glanced at the wires and noticed these flashing red lights on the sides of the train cars and realized that Kim was right. "Oh shit, we gotta get out of here!" Ron yelled in horror. He quickly took Bonnie in his arms and began running towards the exit of the large shed, with Kim running behind him. There were only 15 seconds on the timer. "We have to get out of here and fast," Kim panted. "I know. We have to get far away from here or we'll get caught in the blast," Ron replied, running like a wind. "That devil-crazy masked freak must have rigged those cars into the bombs to try to kill us." "Well, he won't get his wish this time," Kim replied, once they reached the shed doors. Ron easily smashed down the wooden doors with a single kick, and then he and Kim rushed out, only to see several black shadow thugs firing at Global Justice agents. Lloyd and Nelson were also fighting alongside them. Once the shed doors crashed down to the ground, all the thugs turned to face Kim, Ron, and Bonnie. They all turned their weapons on them and opened fire. Luckily, though, Ron had generated his shield around himself and the other two, using his mystical monkey powers. Kim then began firing a revolver at the crooks, striking several of them while the rest were struck down by Global Justice agents. Once they were all dead, Kim yelled, "Run! The tank cars are going to explode!" The Global Justice agents then glanced at each other in confusion as Kim and Ron rushed away from the shed, beaconed with speed as the unconscious Bonnie in Ron's arms. However, once they were far enough from the shed, A massive explosive erupted from inside it. The timers of the bombs had reached 0, and both the tank cars exploded, blowing up the entire shed apart through a massive ball of fire. A powerful shockwave swept across the land and destroyed several other sheds and buildings caught in its wake, and it also knocked Kim and Ron off their feet, causing Bonnie to tumble across the ground. Several of the Global Justice agents quickly radioed for the fire department. As Kim and Ron both got to their feet and rushed over to Bonnie, with Lloyd and Nelson rushing towards them. Once they got a good look at the state Bonnie was in, Lloyd was quickly ordered agents to call for medical backup as well. "Oh my God! What happened to her?" Nelson exclaimed in shock. "She's missing a leg," Bonnie added. "Bonnie's missing a leg," Lloyd added, glancing down at the bloody stump where Bonnie's left foreleg used to be. "Those monsters! What have they done to her?" Ron quickly rushed down towards Bonnie as she lay on her side, covered in dirt, but she was still out cold. However, he leaned in towards her and began shaking her. Ron realized that something was terribly wrong. Bonnie seemed colder than usual, and she didn't seem to be breathing. Kim seemed to notice this as well. "Ron, she's not breathing," Kim said in a frightened voice. "Something's wrong." Ron suddenly leaned over and placed his ear on Bonnie's chest. It felt his heart almost dropped when he realized that Bonnie's heart had stopped, and when she was indeed not breathing. "Oh no, 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 no!" Ron began panicking. "Bonnie! Bonnie!" He began shaking her again, more roughly this time, but she didn't move or wake up. Lloyd then leaned down and felt Bonnie for a pulse, but then sighed with regret when he felt nothing. "She has no pulse," Lloyd said in a regretful voice. I think her injuries took too much of a toll on her body, and it gave out." "No, no!" Ron yelled, shaking his head. "No, she's strong. She was alive back there." He clenched his fist and felt tears running down from his eyes as he shook Bonnie again, and even going as far as to trying to heal her technique on Bonnie with his mystical monkey powers, to try and at least heal some of her injuries, although some of Bonnie's exterior wounds revealed themselves to be healed, and it didn't revive her. "Ron, stop!" Kim replied, placing her hand on his shoulder. There's nothing we can do. She's gone, Ron." Tears were now visible in her eyes. Ron tried to tell herself everything to revive her, but even with his mystical monkey powers, couldn't revive the dead. Ron finally gave up and broke down in tears after realizing that Bonnie was in fact dead, another victim of the Black Shadow's evil. Kim also broke down in tears as Lloyd returned with the white sheet and placed it over Bonnie. They told the other agents to notify Dr. Director about what happened. Ron punched the ground in rage, such a force that it cracked the earth around him. It shook the ground for a brief moment. He felt the red rage begin to stir in him again. This time he was a lot harder to hold back due to how unstable his emotions were, and he has his eyes turned to the bright crimson red like Japan. Kim and the other agents took notice when they stepped back in shock. They killed her! Ron hissed through her clenched teeth. "He kill her!" "Ron, you're losing control again." "Your eyes!" Kim exclaimed in shock. Ron felt the red rage pushing through, and he tried so hard to force it back in his mind, but then he heard that familiar, demonic voice speaking to him in his mind. "You let her die. You couldn't save her." A voice mocked within Ron's mind. "Shut up! Just shut up!" Ron yelled, grabbing his head. "Can't you see how weak you are without my power? You need me, and you know it." Ron knew what would happen if he lost control, and he briefly had flashbacks of what happened in Japan, when the red rage took full control of his mind, and when Ron remembered his illusions, the horror, he knew what would happen again if he lost control. Using all the willpower he had, Ron forced the red rage back and shut Apollyon's voice out. "I don't need you," Ron hissed. Then the glow in the red in his eyes slowly vanished. He breathed heavily, after gaining control of himself, but he felt an immense amount of rage growing through him, realizing that Bonnie was dead, in the result of the Black Shadow. Tears ran down his face as he stood up, gazing down at Bonnie. She was covered by the Global Justice agents. Kim quickly embraced him and sobbed onto his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Ron," Kim sobbed. "We did all we could." I know," Ron replied, then let his emotions flow. He sobbed onto Kim's shoulder as the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. The fire department had arrived. However, as Kim and Ron were mourning for Bonnie's death, A dark figure had hidden near their van, watched the whole thing unfold. How pitiful, the figure sneered. Seems that bitch didn't make it. But that was just an appetizer. The figure then stepped out into the sunlight, revealed the person to be none other than Ridley, and he had been watching the whole thing from the distance. Once Ridley had heard the sirens, he knew this was quite his cue to leave, but before he left, he reached down under Kim and Ron's van, attached something to under the cartridge. It was a tracking device. Soon I'll know where you are and your pathetic allies cowering off to. Then I could finally put the final part of my plan into motion, Ridley hissed. Then he ran off into the woods, where his fighter shuttle was parked, leaving the chaotic scene behind.